Welcome. It's a pleasure to be with you. I am Oliva Lopez, the Managing Director for Partnerships at the Rockefeller Foundation. Before COVID-19, we already knew that millions of low-wage workers, especially Latinx and other communities of color, face difficulties in accessing healthcare and meeting the financial needs of their family. They live in fear of getting sick or losing their jobs. We knew we needed to act with urgency before this crisis, and now our work is even more urgent than ever. The COVID-19 crisis has disproportionately affected lower-income Americans and people of color, including many in the Latinx community. At the Rockefeller Foundation, we've made a commitment to accelerate the public health response to COVID-19 and to drive structural changes in our food and economic systems to make sure that vulnerable families can both survive this pandemic and ultimately also thrive afterwards. We know that testing is critical to mitigate the economic consequences of this crisis so that we can more safely reopen businesses and communities. And that's why the Rockefeller Foundation put forward a national action plan for testing, which is now being implemented in more than a dozen cities, states, and tribal nations around the country, including in farm worker communities in California. We supported the We Must Count Coalition, a civil rights organization, including Unidos, NAACP, and others, to call on the public health agencies to collect and report COVID-19 testing data disaggregated by race, gender, and ethnicity. And we are also incredibly proud to support the Farm Workers Pandemic Relief Fund for the 3 million farm workers who help feed America through their labor. New power is all around us. And we've seen it in the way that our community has responded to COVID-19, and we see it in the faces and determination of the protesters around the country. We are being forced to recognize the power of the most vulnerable communities, and against this backdrop of a pandemic, we see change underfoot. Now it is my honor to welcome Mónica Ramírez, the founder of Justice for Migrant Women and a co-founder of Alianza Nacional de Campesinas. She's an organizer and a long-term advocate for civil and human rights, and she's focused most of her career on the needs of the Latinx community. Monica will lead us in this critical discussion, and with that, I'd like to turn it over to Monica.
Thank you, Oliva, and thank you so much to the Rockefeller Foundation for your support of the farm worker community during this COVID crisis, and in addition to the farm worker community, all of those who are being impacted. We're really grateful for all of your support, and we know that from what we're hearing on the ground, what we're going to talk about today, we know that the situation is it's pretty dire. And for those of you who maybe are less familiar with the farm worker community, we wanted to share with you more information about the farm worker community, what the current state of play is on the ground for community members, and to talk about all the ways in which we're building power in this moment despite the crisis. So it's my honor and pleasure to have Ramona DeLoera join us for this conversation along with Nick Gonzalez. And let me introduce Ramona and Nick and then jump right into this conversation. So Ramona DeLoera is a farm worker community leader from Wauchula, Florida. She began working in the fields at the age of 8 alongside her family, growing and harvesting America's fruits and vegetables, including oranges, tomatoes, and peppers. A work-related injury left Ramona with lifelong complications that have limited her ability to perform heavy lifting, but she continues to work in the fields while caring for her 7 daughters and advocating for our community. Through her participation in the Migrant and Seasonal Head Start program, she's a parent leader. Ramona has become a powerful voice for farm worker families by highlighting their needs and contributions in media interviews, visits with Congress, and panel discussions. Thank you, Ramona, for joining us.
Thank you for having me.
And Nick Gonzalez is here with us as well. Nick is an actor, an activist, a producer, and a spokesperson for the Masks for Farm Workers campaign, which we're going to talk about more today. Nick has a long-standing history and commitment to projects both on camera and off that highlight the injustices, struggles, and victories of human condition. So we want to talk a little bit first about the situation confronting farm workers. for those of you who maybe are less familiar with the farm worker community, I am the daughter and granddaughter of migrant farm workers, and what most people across the country might not realize is that migrant farm workers are working in the fields and packing houses, and they're also working in nurseries. There are 2.5 to 3 million farm workers across our nation. And still today, despite many efforts by incredible activists and organizations like Dolores Huerta and the work of Cesar Chavez and United Farm Workers and so many others, farm workers still face many difficulties, including poor housing, poor working conditions, and the situation was ripe for the farm worker community to be impacted in a very devastating way during this COVID crisis. And Ramona, I think it would be really helpful for people tuning in to understand from you, what is it that we're hearing from folks on the ground? What are you hearing from people in your community about how this COVID crisis is impacting them?
Well, Monica, what I'm hearing, what I'm seeing is that farm workers are looking for that help. They are looking for food drives, food banks. They are looking for emergency funds just to help them pay for their rent, food, utilities, just the basic necessities. That is what I'm hearing and seeing right now with a lot of families and farm workers.
And Ramona, I know at the beginning of the pandemic, so in March, when a group of more than 100 farm worker families, leaders came together to have a conversation about what the priorities were, we were hearing then about some of what you're talking about, the food insecurity, which is appalling considering that farm workers are going to work every day to feed our families and facing food insecurity. How has the crisis changed now, a couple of months in? Are you hearing about different concerns beyond some of the initial concerns that were raised at the start of this pandemic?
Oh, actually, Monica, pretty much is the same. There is more food out in the market to get. Not full stack of food is there, but there is more. We are looking at, a lot of farm workers are going to churches to look for masks because that's something we still can't find at the stores. Alcohol, that emergency stuff that we need, we don't have it. There's none in the stores. But pretty much it's the same. Numbers of cases are actually going up now, and it's not safe to be out there at all. But I mean, we need to go out there and we need to work, and we can't afford to stay home. Our job does not consist of a computer or a laptop or work from home. Our job is to go out there, be out in the fields and work.
Thank you, Ramona. And, so in addition to the food insecurity and not being able to find everything that people need to stay safe in the moment, I know we've heard from mothers around the country about the additional pressure they're facing related to not having childcare, and the fact that the physical distancing requirements is preventing people from having as many hours of work. And despite all of the problems and all the difficulties that people are facing, I know when you and I had a conversation last month, we were talking about the fact that the farm worker community is resilient and continues to show its power even with all of the challenges. How do you think this moment of crisis is providing more opportunities for the farm worker community to show its power and resilience in this moment?
Well, right now, something I have never seen before is that now we are essential. Even though we are essential and we are there working, still the pay is not the best. Even though we are putting food out on tables for families across the country, we still don't have enough to put food in our own table for our families. So yeah.
Thank you, Ramona. And you talked about not having enough PPE, and that's something that we've heard from farm workers all around the country, that when they're going to work, they're not being given masks, they're not being given gloves or any other safety equipment. So even though farm workers have been deemed essential and keep going to work, there is this real risk that farm workers will get sick. And as you said, we are seeing the situation of farm workers who've become ill in states like Florida and California and Texas and other places. And that situation, you know, the understanding that farm workers were not getting PPE, that actually inspired a friend of ours named Mario DeLatorre, who's a fashion designer, to create a project called Masks for Farm Workers. And the Masks for Farm Workers project is an initiative that is being organized by Justice for Migrant Women, our organization, along with Hispanic Heritage Foundation and the National Center for Farm Worker Health. And Nick is the national spokesperson for that project. And Nick, could you share with us a little bit about why you decided to get involved, and also in this moment as we are seeing, people building power despite the crisis, how would you encourage people to just get started in this moment? Because some people talk about being paralyzed. So love to hear more from you about why you got involved and how people can get started.
Well, for me, just to tailor even that first answer to our audience here, and hello everybody, and thank you for joining us, is that for me, and what I think is probably a good advice to give not only to corporations, individuals, and government, is looking at causes that we see a direct result of, not big parent companies that we're constantly throwing money to, or corporations our funding goes to, and we don't see real change on the ground. But when we can have direct contact with community leaders like Ramona, like yourself, Monica, and work within those networks, we see money go exactly where it's needed. And that's one of the biggest reasons why I got involved with Masks for Farm Workers, because this started with boots on the ground. This started with Mario, seeing an issue, wanting to change that, and galvanizing support, whether it was, through you and Antonio Tijerino and National the Hispanic Heritage Foundation. Being able to make a direct change was really important. One example, when Mario was first getting involved, there was Sylvia, one of our farm workers, who is a mother of 8 children, a husband with aggressive stomach cancer. She is the breadwinner for the family and still has to go to work while trying to take care of a husband who's dealing with this, who's also not being able to get cancer treatment because they don't even have masks to be able to go into the clinic to get his chemo treatment. So these very basic things, which we try to go through foundations and take months to get a result or even to get money, it took people on the ground to say, we're going to change this. And that's what Mario did, was he was able to overnight mask that he'd sewn himself for the family, for the children, and get it right where it's needed. And that's the biggest thing. That's what gets me involved. The causes that get me involved are where we can make direct change. And I think that's also the future of philanthropy.
Thanks, Nick. And for those who are just tuning in, the Farm Workers Pandemic Relief Fund, which Justice for Migrant Women created in collaboration with Hispanics in Philanthropy, our host for today's conference, that was a fund that was really established in order to help meet some of the basic needs that Ramona talked about, to get food and diapers and formula and other things, direct cash assistance to the farm worker community in this time of crisis. But we also learned in the process of building this project with Mario that it wasn't just farm workers who were at risk of not getting the masks and other protective wear that they needed, but also the migrant health clinics. Nick, can you share more about that so folks can have a better understanding of that situation?
At its best, the system is broken for a lot of people. And already these rural clinics, which you've referred to, that are available to our migrant farm worker community, were already underserved and underfinanced, and PPE being one of the biggest things in this particular pandemic that posed such a problem. And there's so many across the state, and there's clinics that are even going out of business that don't even have the funds to just stay in business, much less have the proper equipment to be able to serve the farm worker community. So Masks for Farm Workers, while having the name Mask, was really a larger, it became a bigger movement when in a pandemic relief fund, as you said, Ramona, providing food for food insecurity, which is the craziest thing, people that provide our food, and we brag in this country about our food supply and how it's going to keep us all safe during this pandemic. And the very people that are providing that for us all do not have the food to do the job, even much less the PPE and stay safe. And you see photos of farm workers getting their temperatures taken before work, and people kitted out in full PPE, hoods, masks, and they're wearing bandanas and maybe glasses if they, there's really no protection. And so when we're not even funding these clinics, they don't have anywhere to turn, much less the ability and transparency within the employers and the farm workers not being able to really communicate, because if you're positive, you're fired. You're not given any way to treat or how to take care of it. You're then left on your own. And as we found, it's not easy for social distancing to occur when you're living with 20 other people in, maybe a 2-bedroom house. And that's not even counting getting to and from the fields in crowded buses and cars. So the problem is bigger, even in everyday circumstances. And now with the pandemic is just even more, it was even more highlighted. So it's something we jumped on and continue to put the funds where it's needed. And again, having those boots on the ground, having these networks that are so well cultivated, and the information is so new, we're not dealing with the problem from 4 months ago. We hit those problems, and we're dealing with the things from today. And that's the big difference, I think, in when getting involved in philanthropy, is trying to find organizations on the ground to build these networks to be able to get the money right where it's needed. We love United Way, we love all these other organizations that work, but at the same time, there's a lot of inequities in there that are inherent in that system, and we need to change that.
Thank you, Nick. And so we've surfaced a lot of the issues and challenges that are confronting the farm worker community, and we've talked about some of these initiatives that the farm worker community is organizing to try to meet some of these needs. Ramona, what are some of the opportunities that you see for farm worker leaders like you moving forward from this crisis? Where do we go from here when it comes to building power with and for the farm worker community?
One of the things that I would like is keep supporting the farm workers, not just now because of the COVID-19, but every day as well. Also very important, equal benefits. We can't afford, to be able to stay home, like I said, and support our families. We can't do that. One important thing, health benefits. We work in one of the most dangerous industries, like pesticides, heavy lifting. What happened to me was a heavy lifting. And we do put our health at risk every day at work. So those are some of the things that I would like and keep in mind.
Thank you, Ramona. And Nick, you touched on this a little bit. You started to share with us what you think are some things that philanthropy and corporations and others can do differently. So what is your vision coming out of this crisis about how philanthropy, corporations, and other individuals can step in and step up going forward?
Well, coming off of what Ramona said about individuals, I think one of the biggest things, and one of the biggest, if I can even say a blessing that we have in this, ideally if it remains in the consciousness of America, is that us being farm workers being deemed essential workers, and realizing that's a year-round, that's an always situation. If food scarcity remains a problem across the United States, and to know that this is the very place we're getting from, to realize just how important. So I definitely see that opportunity, and I'm buoyed by that thought that we can even be viewed differently. Our community, and specifically the farm worker community, can be viewed differently and realize just how essential they are. And for individuals, just get started. That's how Mario started this. That's why we're here today, is from one person saying, I'm just going to get started and try to change these issues, rather than being caught in this paralysis and not knowing what to do next. Corporation and traditional philanthropy, we've seen that there's just a lot of issues with that. There's inequities that are built into it, communities that are underserved, ours namely. And I think it will behoove corporations to interrogate their process, look at the limitations, look at the historic limitations, or the historic inequities that have kept the funds that they were given in good faith and donated in good faith, and they need to hit the people that need them. And whether that's going to be, donating feels good, but is it fair? And really looking at that process, changing, whether it's changing out the old representatives that that are still trying the old ways to get money to communities that are underserved, and maybe bringing in consultants that can join with people like Monica, with you, Ramona, that know the problems on the ground, so we can actually hit those instead of having to go through all these different steps. And to know that to trust networks that have been built, like Justice for Migrant Women, with HIP, the different organizations that we've been able to galvanize together, is realizing that those networks are much stronger than, again, these third parties that we try to go through to then have the money whittled down to each of us. And then building those networks, these are not one-offs, foster a relationship that can really bring about good change, rather than, I put these kind of one-off donations and throwing money at a situation along with hopes and prayers and words. Those aren't enough. It really isn't enough. And I think that now, with the advent of social media, we're going to see so much more that people realize you can start a movement. You can call companies to tasks. We want to see product donated, Procter & Gamble, people that deal in the actual PPE that's needed, alcohol wipes and all the different types of things that were in such scarcity, and being able to donate that product directly to where it's needed to these essential workers. And then a cooperation, between employees and workers, because a lot of times we're seeing where farm workers' voice is being shut out by the very employers that aren't allowing the information to either get to them or out to the public, to us, to know what the problem is. And that's why, again, these small networks are essential. And the more we can foster those networks, the more that corporations that are interested in donating can look to these ways. Philanthropy just needs to really value those networks and bridge that gap. And that would be, I think, the thing I see coming off of this. And if anything, we should be buoyed by that sense of hope too. This is a problem that seems insurmountable, but now eyes are finally on. Now we've been deemed essential workers. Now, the spotlight is here, and ideally we can really change the way we all work at it.
Thank you, Nick. Thank you, Ramona. And, I just want to add to something that Nick said, which is about trusting the community. We know that philanthropy has not invested enough in the Latinx community. The farm worker community majority of the farm worker community is Latinx. And when you only have 1% of investment going into a community of, millions of people, that's certainly not enough. And there are many essential workers across our nation who are also Latinx and people of color who've been marginalized for so long. And so we ask that as philanthropy thinks of the way forward and the way that it can work in partnership with folks like Ramona and with other community members who are building power across the country, we hope that people will understand that the wisdom that exists in the community is something that needs to be supported, because people know best what they need. We are now about to wrap up, and I want to give you each the last word. Ramona, what is your call to action for people who are tuning in to know how they can best support the power building that's happening with the farm worker community?
Well, Monica, just keep up with the supporting the farm workers. Find out if they don't. I know a lot of people doesn't know the meaning of farm farm workers, what they do. It's every day going out, working long hours from sunrise to sundown. As a mom, still going home and cook and clean and deal with children and homework. It's a lot, but it gets done. It has to get done. So just keep in mind the life of a farm worker. It's not easy. It's very hard.
Thank you, Ramona, for all of your leadership and for all of your work. Nick, what's your call to action?
Call to action for individuals, honestly, is hold the businesses you patronize accountable. If you're going to be giving your money, and there's brands that, I've been faithful to ever since I was a child, that I never even think, a second thought about, but holding them accountable, using your power. Social media has proved an incredible resource, because that's where everyone else is, that's where corporations are putting out their advertising. And if we can take them to task on these in a very open forum and educate them, and not in a way that turns them up, but hopefully to galvanize support. That's the power you have, and get started. Mario did it, and here we are. For corporations and those interested in philanthropy, I would say interrogate the process. Look at an overhaul and a change there, and get it to the grassroots efforts that are happening on the ground. let's get it into the hands of the experts that know exactly where it needs to be.
Thank you, Nick. Thank you, Ramona. So we're building power across the nation, despite the fact that we're living through this pandemic, and individuals and organizations need continued support. So thank you for all of those who are tuning in, who have supported the farm worker community and others who are being impacted by this pandemic. We hope that you will consider interrogating your practices and continuing to support the community even beyond this crisis. And we are now about to conclude, and we invite you to please join the next session, which is Chismecito Caliente with Angela Johnson Reyes and Olga Segura, my dear friends. Please hop on over to the next session for a conversation with them and closing remarks from Ana Maria Agrilagos. Thank you so much.
Thank you.